Now, a 2024 study reports a steady decline in mental health among emerging adults, with a major surge on mental illness driven by COVID-19, or at least the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, let's zoom in on the big picture. What do we do to help the Filipino youth? Now, what are some of the misguidances we need to break from? This morning, we speak to a registered psychometrician and a content creator who helps young people online unpack their emotions. It's a beautiful day, Miss Justine Danielle Reyes. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a beautiful day and I'm happy to be here.
We're sorry to use your entire name to
Yeah.
address you first. We're not mad at you. So thank you very much for being here, Danny. Let's talk first about the content that you make and the role that you're playing online, or at least a role you feel like you're playing. Just how important is it to put out that type of content and addressing the audience that you do have?
Well, I am Gen Z, so I've always been on the internet. I grew up with the internet and I've always been vocal about having opinions on different social issues. But as a psychology major back in 2014 to 2018, I just started sharing more things that I learned about mental health and figured that with the passage of the Mental Health Act in 2017, it was a conversation that needed to be had. And that's where I started from, just casually posting on Twitter, Instagram, just raising awareness, basically. And then I kind of took it a bit more seriously after I passed my board exam. In 2018, I shared tips on how to pass the board exam. And from there, it was very intermittent because I had to look for a full-time job. Social media back then wasn't a serious thing. It wasn't really realistic unless you had connections. So it was something that I held off up until just last year. I went on TikTok, started making content there because I was itching to teach again. And I felt that it was a good outlet for me to talk about mental health, to talk to psychology majors, and raise awareness on what a psychometrician does.
Could you tell us more what a psychometrician does actually? Because we were all curious this morning, and it's so interesting.
Yeah, so a psychometrician is a bachelor's degree holder here in the Philippines. We're licensed to handle testing and assessment, and under the supervision of a psychologist, we get to write reports and share these to our stakeholders. I am a psychometrician in higher education, so my stakeholders are students, professors, and even parents.
Okay, and when you say you write reports, what trends have you been seeing in mental health?
It's actually pretty interesting in the last 2 years. We've noticed a surge in anxiety, at least anxiety symptoms among youth, among college students, because we're noticing the aftermath of the pandemic. I think we're coming out of the pandemic technically, but at the same time, it's like we're now experiencing the effects of it because a lot of adolescents didn't really have the proper social environment to build their social skills. We're now seeing them feeling more anxious, a little less competent in terms of socializing with others. Some of them would even express a lot of stress going back to face-to-face classes again because they've gotten so used to online classes. Which is ironic because when we started in the pandemic, everyone was complaining about how everything was going online and you didn't have third spaces anymore. So that's just about it. What's good is that now that we're shifting back to face-to-face classes, I think that a lot of students are starting to feel hopeful again about how they are going to experience a normal growth up until young adulthood. So there's a light at the end of the tunnel, I feel.
You know, I totally understand what she's saying because my daughter, after the pandemic, she really had a hard time coping with the sudden change from being online all the time and then to suddenly socializing with other people again. So she used to be a social butterfly, and then the pandemic just really changed how her life is now after the pandemic. So you have a huge following on TikTok, and I understand that you also do speaking engagements, right? So you're exposed to a lot of these young people with mental health issues. So what do you think are the most pressing issues that the young people have relating to their mental health?
Well, mainly I talk about stress and burnout among youth. I get invited to educational institutions a lot to talk about how to cope with stress and burnout. And a lot of our students are feeling like they don't have the proper resources or they don't have the proper support to cope with stress. Because back then when we were in college, back then it was easy to complain and do it. Right now, we're seeing students complain and not be able to do it because apart from online classes not feeling real, like we're seeing our older college students feeling not ready enough to get jobs and to start a career because like online classes did not feel like the complete college experience. One way of going about it now is to equip them with the skills to constantly remind them that stress is a part of life, but we're seeing unrealistic and unmanageable levels of stress among youth these days. So it's important to help them differentiate stress from burnout because burnout is when it starts to get serious and that's like on the verge of clinical problems.
Dan, you mentioned sometimes the online classes don't feel real, but then a lot of people, their whole social lives right now, well, at least some of the younger people, revolve around online, social media. How real is that compared to actual connections that are face-to-face? Is that something that's different? Or is that a type of connection that could at least substitute real connection?
I like what you said earlier about asking me what my role is on social media because social media tends to feel like a performance. And sure, initially social media was created to connect with others, to make sure that we maintain our relationships, but it's turned into this whole third space where we feel too self-conscious of ourselves. We're seeing young people hesitant to share. You know how Instagram was in 2012 where you'd share like your coffee?
That.
I miss that.
That
Nobody cares
Instagram.
what you post. You just post
Right
just
now,
to show
we're seeing young people who are like, oh, I don't think this is Instagram worthy. We're seeing words like, is this social media worthy? There's too much self-consciousness surrounding it that young people who are supposed to connect on the internet and supposed to feel connected to humanity, they're a lot more isolated now because they feel like people are out there to judge them. And this whole phenomenon on social media where you post the wrong thing or you don't perform a certain way, you get called out. And that's terrifying.
Absolutely. I remember one of my very first posts on Instagram was about a chair. And there was nothing Instagram worthy. It's not for the gram, or as my generation used to call it. But we're talking a lot about the youth. But then again, a lot of our viewers are actually parents here. How could they relate to their kids going through these problems that they did not go through? To be quite honest, they did not go through the type of social media induced stress or anxiety. So how could they relate to their kids knowing all of this?
I think one mistake that people make when it comes to interacting with people from different generations is that they always assume, oh, we had it so much worse, or, you know, we survived it, why can't you?
Actually,
and it's so important that we find common ground. Like the Philippines is a very collective culture, and it's so important that we figure out how we could connect and maybe we develop a better curiosity of what young people are going through instead of being judgmental about their very petty complaints. So one thing to avoid is to say, you know, we've had it so much worse, because it doesn't really help. Because apart from that, what's next, right? So one good way of starting the conversation would be to develop enough curiosity to ask, like, what's going on and how are you doing, really? I think parents, they tend to underestimate how powerful it is to check in on your children. And one issue, one barrier I feel would be parents tend to press for solutions right away when in fact we're seeing Gen Zs just want to like vent, they want to express their emotions. And holding that safe space for them where they get to rant about things and you don't immediately provide solutions, it's one way to help them feel better.
Danny, sorry, we have to wrap things up in just a bit. Of course, you can follow Danny on Just Danny, at Just Danny on her social media accounts. But then for those who are looking for practical advice and who are dealing with mental health issues, what is your last word with regards to helping them address this? Whether it be inviting them to look for therapy, counseling, or the like, just to be able to make sure that they're going to be okay.
I think the best advice that I could give that's very practical is to find communities that you can be part of. This could be your family, this could be your friends, could be your peers, could be people that you share hobbies with. Just having a community that you can lean onto in times of support is one way of addressing at least the most urgent mental health concerns that we have.
All right, and that's at Just Danny. You can follow her on TikTok And of course, check out all her content. Again, if you guys do need help with regards to your mental health, make sure that you go check out her account, see what advice she could give you. And of course, don't be afraid to go to therapy, for counseling, and of course, reaching out to people as well. Thank you very much. That's Danny Reyes. Really appreciate
Thank you so much
joining
for
us here
having
today.
me. Thank you.